Hello there, this is Pastor Tabitha Purple, and today I have a massive pile of Bibles in front of me because we are doing my Bible and my Bibles, and we're doing our Bible review show, which is really exciting. I enjoy that. And so what's really fabulous is that we're looking at something that people want to shy away from in some circles, some things that have become kind of a secret for some people, and people don't talk about it as frequently. So today I want to put it front and center here, which is we're going to talk about a paraphrase. Okay, and so I think I've talked to you before about the differences between translation and paraphrase, and so today we're going to go in a bit more detail, and we're going to look at several paraphrases that I own, and why I own them, why I think they're useful, what purpose they can serve, and how not to get too overly excited about the extremities that people go to about paraphrases. So the first thing to do is to define what a paraphrase is. Now, I think firstly we have to define what a Bible is in order to define what a paraphrase is. So of course the Bible in its original form, Hebrew, Greek and Aramaic, is the inspired word of God. Now, depending on the tradition you come from, will depend on what that inspiration looks like. So for some people, it's the literal words. For other people, it's thought inspiration. It depends on your background. But these scriptures have been handed down, whether you believe it's every word or whether you believe it's inspired. They've been handed down generation to generation, century after century, and have been translated numerous times into various languages, from Latin in the earliest stages all the way through now to some of our older languages that are now finally receiving new translations, should I say it like that. So of course English is a widely spoken language. I work within the English and Dutch churches, and therefore I have Dutch and English Bibles. But there are older languages than English and Dutch who are now receiving translations in parts of the African continent and the Asian continent, are finally getting translations into their language because their language groups are smaller. But we're going to deal with something called a paraphrase in the English language. So there are two camps. There is translation of those old scriptures, and there is paraphrase of those scriptures. And a translation, and we've talked about this, seeks to do something. It seeks to take the words and literally translate it into the language that it's being spoken. And it will do this by numerous various methodologies. But the idea is that you are translating from one language into another language. Sometimes that has to be an interpretive element because maybe there are words used in the other language that don't exist in this language, or maybe there are words in this language that didn't exist. Maybe there is a concept that's being spoken about here that doesn't exist here, and maybe there are concepts here that don't apply there. So there's all sorts of challenges with translation, and if you're a bilingual person, you understand this very well because you speak between 3 or 4 languages, 2, 3, 4 languages, and you understand very well that there are words that just don't translate. You can't find the meaning for. You have to say whole paragraphs to get across the sentiment of one word. And some languages are richer than other languages and have a more expressive vocabulary. That depends on the country, that depends on the culture of the language. So there is all that element. And then there is something called a paraphrase. And a paraphrase is seeking to get across the meaning. It is one person's interpretive meaning of that scripture. And so depending on the paraphrase will depend on what the source material is. So for some people, they take the source material from the Hebrew Greek and then they paraphrase it. For others, they will take an English translation and then they will work within that, because what they're trying to do is get across the story for whatever the purpose is that they're doing that. And that's very important to understand the differences. Now, some people are of the opinion that you cannot apply the word Bible to a paraphrase and feel very strongly about that. And other people are of the opinion that it's fine. I'm not here to make that judgment. I'm here to tell you that's what it is. For me, I think it's important that we just understand what it is that you're reading. And if you understand what it is and what the purpose is, you can better appreciate the actual Bible in front of you. So I've spoken about this before. I do use paraphrases. And in fact, sometimes teaching, I'm a teacher, I'm a preacher, I'm a pastor, and I'm often paraphrasing the Bible because it's to get across the meaning to the person in front of me. You know, sometimes you have the time to sit and do, you know, a good long teaching where you expound on every word, but other times you're trying to do a 10-minute talk or a devotional, and I will paraphrase what the text is saying or say in other words. And so in order to get across a meaning that may be relevant to the person's congregation, people in front of me. And so I think for people who say that paraphrases are of no use and that you're being disingenuous to how we teach the Bible, that's why we have commentaries and we have exegesis and we have all sorts of tools that we use, because we're looking at a language that is not ours. This is written in the Hebrew, Aramaic and Greek. These are dead languages. They're not spoken anymore. They're not, while we have family to those languages, there are languages, of course, related to, there's modern Hebrew, modern Greek and modern Aramaic, and those languages exist, though they are not the same. If you, and any biblical scholar, I learned New Testament Greek, who's learnt a language like that and then gone to the country of origin, will note very quickly, while you feel quite excited because you can see all the similarities, there are moments of sheer horror because you don't know anything. And so it's important for us to understand that as modern readers, as 21st century readers, to be authentic and to be honest, I think, about what we're doing. And so mostly the paraphrases are written by one person. Sometimes they're written by committee. Sometimes they have a set of editors that will go in and look at them afterwards. And so oftentimes it's not just a singular person, but there is an overriding person's dominant vision for why they want to write that story. So that's important to know. I have a few varied paraphrases in front of me. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we're going to talk about today. You know, the most popular of which is this one, The Message. This is one of the latest. There is a lot to be said about The Message. A lot of people have a lot to say about The Message. The Message is written by Eugene Patterson. It's published by Navy Press. It has a bunch of editors. I have a Bible journaling version of it. I have not dug into this yet. It's on my list of things to do, but this isn't as high up on my list. But this is one of the Bible paraphrases that we have. And one of the challenges, of course, it looks very much like a regular Bible, but it has been paraphrased by Eugene Patterson. And it's a contemporary, his idea is that it's a contemporary rendering of the Bible from the original language, crafted to present its tone, rhythm, events and ideas in everyday language. So of course he's trying to actually translate this into a way, or to convey this, and I use the word translate, in a way that actually brings across a meaning that is relevant to people who maybe have never read the Bible. We're moving in circles, definitely within the English-speaking world and within European centres, where people are less and less have read any of the stories. We were at the point before where many people had read the stories. And so it's understandable that you would want, if somebody's reading a story for the first time, that they actually are able to read the story. And so one of the things that is done is that while there are chapters, there aren't verses. And so you can read it very much as a flowing story, more as it was intended, of course, because if you look at the original Hebrew, Greek and Aramaic, they don't have verses, numbers, and often not punctuation. So you have to be interpretive when reading anyway. And so that's something to say. So some of us are quite hooked on the way that our Bibles are written in the translation form. But of course, those things that we're hooked on are not in the original language. So what is it that we're hooked on? We're hooked on our style. And so be mindful of that when you say that. And so that's the purpose of, say, something like the canvas. And I'm just going to take you through some of the ones I have in front of me, and just go through and show you a little bit about why I like them. And so first, let me just say this. Why do I use paraphrases? I've used paraphrases because I love I'm a storyteller. I love to read and I love stories. I love visual stories particularly. And so I enjoy the story of the Bible, the actual overarching, it's a big narrative, it's a meta narrative, it's a huge story. It involves lots of different characters, most of which are not particularly nice, but the hero is always God, which is lovely. It makes my job really easy as a reader. But it involves all of these different types of people, cultures, places. There's a lot to learn about. And sometimes when I'm studying it, you can get lost in the finer details of what you have to learn and miss the story that God is trying to tell you. And I believe that in some ways the Bible is a love story to humanity. It's God's love for us being displayed through these words, through these people, through this time. And he's trying to explain how he's trying to redeem us beyond our sinful, wicked ways and all of the stress and the strife that we've created on this earth. And says we weren't meant for that. And to tell us that love story, to tell us that he is willing to die, put his life on the line, to come down, to rescue us. If it was anybody, it was him. And to see that overall story is, of course, really wonderful. So I use paraphrases because of that. I also use paraphrases because it depends on the reading level of somebody. It depends on how you see the story, might depend on how you interpret it. Sometimes we can be quite clinical when we look on the Bible and we forget that there are people being spoken about and we miss the passion and the humanity in the story. Sometimes if I'm working with young people, it's easier to use Picto Bibles and paraphrases. We do forget that I could have had a bigger pile of Bibles if I was then to include all the paraphrases I really have in the house. Millions of children's Bibles are regularly paraphrased. They don't use the actual words of the Bible. They use a paraphrase, a retelling of the story. And so on and so forth. And I think it really depends. Some people say, oh, that's not a Bible. How dare you say the children's Bible is a Bible? It's a paraphrase. It's a children's telling. And I think it's just really arrogant to have those sorts of things. So I'm going to show you a selection of mine. As I say, I don't have all of the children's ones here. I literally have just the paraphrases I've used. And then we're going to just round off. Okay, so if you have any questions about paraphrases, if you find that if a paraphrase isn't for you, don't read it. Not everything is for everyone, and that's okay. But there are some people who really have come to freedom in God because they've been reading through a paraphrase. And that's really quite important for us to understand, that not everything is about us as individuals, like me personally. It has to be inclusive of me. No, it doesn't. It's not about you. It's about God's message getting out there and getting to people who need it desperately to find the hope, the love of God. And therefore, if this doesn't speak to you, don't use it. If this confuses you, don't use it. If this is difficult for you, don't use it. But I think that knowledge is power, and therefore you don't have to look down on someone else. You don't have to belittle someone else who is using a paraphrase, because for them, that has helped them to get their relationship with God closer and easier to understand. And so that's where I'm coming from. It's very much, let's be respectful of one another. And there are reasons that paraphrases exist. There are reasons that we have these sorts of Bibles and why they are so popular. And why they have endured the test of time. We've been paraphrasing the Bible for centuries. This is not a new tradition by any stretch. The Message being one of the latest traditions, but there are millions of paraphrases, and they have been done over history and time, because it's about understanding the one true God who created the whole world. It's about understanding his love for us, and it's about wrestling sometimes with things that we find difficult. So without further ado, let me show you some of my paraphrases so you can get a sense of the differences and the vast differences in a paraphrase, and how they are meant to be used and how they can enhance your study or not, as the case may be. Okay, so the first one I promised I would dig into is the canvas. As I said, I haven't actually spent much time in this one, so I can't really speak to its usability. I know many people who love this. I have the Bible journaling version because of the love of the community for this one. Lots and lots of Bible journalers absolutely adore this particular Bible and find it easy. It's a single column Bible. Of course, it's filled with beautiful artwork. There's lots of space for you to write and study within. There are moments where there is artwork already. To be honest, it's a very beautiful Bible. And when we go to the reviews of Bible journaling Bibles, which I will begin, you'll get to see more of this and some of the other Bible journaling. Now, some people will find this really difficult, but one of the nice things, of course, as I've spoken about, is the fact that you can just read the passage without having all the stop points. So you're reading it more as a story. And so it doesn't have the verses, but it does have the chapters, just to help you, guide you with whereabouts in a book you are. Because remember, in regular books we have chapters. That's a normal thing for somebody. So if you've never read a Bible before, you will be used to the chapter system. You will be used to picking up a Bible, picking up a book, and it has a chapter in it. These are smaller than what you would be used to, because of course there's 66 books in the one book, so that is a complication that people have to get accustomed to, but it does make it easier. So for example, here in Matthew, of course it starts with chapter 1, and then it says the family tree of Jesus Christ, David's son, Abraham's son. These will all be words that are quite familiar with people. Maybe they're a bit more blunt to the point, but they have it. And so then it goes through, and the reading is Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, Jacob had Judah and his brothers. Judah had Perez and Zerah. The mother was Tamar. Now you can see the rhythm of what's being created is more rhythmic in terms of how you would read it in the Hebrew as well. You would get that kind of rhythmic nature. And so you have that. But then you have things like they have subheadings for the chapters. Again, something that would be normal to readers of text. And this particular subheading after the birth of Jesus is Scholars from the East. That to people would be quite a surprise. If you've grown up on the story of baby Jesus, you're used to magi or wise people, you'd be like, scholars, oh, hold on, what's happening here? But again, the purpose that he set out, Mr. Patterson has set out in the beginning, is to make this usable for readers, to make it usable for people who have not read a Bible, who are coming to this fresh and really need a way into the scripture. And so that I think is really important. So that's the message, and that's by Eugene Patterson. It is published by Navy Press. Let me see if I can give you any other details that you might want. Navy Press is with Tyndale, so again, it's a big publisher. We have all of that. So yeah, I think that's pretty clear what it is. The message has been published since 1993 and has been updated all the way until 2002, I believe, is the last copyright date. Okay, so that was the last time Mr. Patterson did this Bible. So there you go. And again, if you understand the purpose, it just helps. No one from the paraphrase community, this is a nice box it's kept in, isn't that lovely? Makes it easier for me to pack it all away, which is quite lovely. No one, I think, from the paraphrase community is saying that this is how you have to interpret it. They're saying this is one way of us telling the story of the Bible so that we can get that. Now, onto a Bible that you've seen me use before. This is the Living Bible. This is another paraphrase. I've mentioned this when I talked about the New Living Translation, just to mention that there are two out there. This, I believe, is no longer in publication, but it was given to me some time ago. This is one of the ones where I've got to be honest, as a young person, when I received this, I fell in love with the story. As you can see, I've got highlights everywhere. It was so punchy, it sounded so alive, it just was so fresh to my ears, especially coming off of a conservative tradition where we'd only ever read King James and the NIV was its poor relation, and there was that real tension. So reading the Living Bible almost in secret in some ways was just such a joy, because it was like, you know, it was so punchy. If I look here in Proverbs, it's like there are 4 things that are small but unusually wise. Ants, they aren't strong but store up food for the winter. Cliff badgers, delicate little animals who protect themselves by living among the rocks. The locusts, though they have no leader, they stay together in swarms. The lizards, they are easy to catch and kill, yet they are found in every king's palace. And you know, the irony, of course, of how it is, you know, an ant is actually super strong, but in the grand scheme of things, as I'm the big person, an ant is not strong. I can squish it quite easily. So, you know, it just had such an alive way of reading it. So it really helped me in my journey to falling in love. I don't actually think they publish this anymore, but it's just a copy that I still have because it has so many good memories. And of course, you can see it's a well-loved version of the Bible that I've used over the years. This one by Trevor Dennis, the Book of Books. It's the Bible Retold. I got this actually because I bought the last one, right? And so the purpose of this one is really about, I guess he started with younger readers and then what would bridge the gap between younger readers and adults, I guess. And I loved it because it's just so readable. It looks like a book that I would read. I could give it to somebody, they could read it on a train. It's the paper is the right thickness. The text looks like a text. It is just so easy to read. And I don't get bogged down with words I don't know. I don't get bogged down with ideas that maybe are completely unfamiliar to me. And it just helps. Like, it just really helps to read this in a way that was nice and get the whole story across. I could read this as if it was a great work of art, you know, and read the 500 pages as if I was reading a novel for 500 pages. And therefore, it's a great overall view of the story to keep that overview in my mind. And then when you're in love with the story, you get a Bible translation and you can dig into the words, the actual stories. What did they actually say in those things? It's a really interesting, really fascinating, really lovely. I enjoy it very much. I haven't read it I read it the first time I got it. I just read it without stopping, like a novel, and I was actually studying at the time, so it was a great way to read something that was really quite serious, but in a way that I was familiar with. And so I've loved the Book of Books by Trevor Dennis. I think he's done a wonderful job. Trevor Dennis, at the time of writing, was the Vice Dean of Chester Cathedral. He'd written 4 books on the Old Testament, as well as 4 collections of story sermons or verse sermons. The Book of Books is the first one for younger readers, but he took most of his scholarship and all of his powers of storytelling and did it. So the aim of this was actually for younger readers. I won't let you know what that says about me when I read books, but I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was such a nice way of getting into it, and I'm looking forward to sharing this one with my children. My kids have read many paraphrases because they've read many children's Bibles, but I'm really looking forward to passing this one on and allowing them to just read the whole entire story in one go. I think that's lovely. So then we have this one, Rob Lacey, The Street Bible. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So I don't know if I bought this because it was for fun. I don't know. It just, something about it just popped out to me. The way that it's written is quite interesting. If you can tell, it's from the 1990s, I think. It's by Rob Lacey. I think it's from the 1990s. It comes out of the kind of Soul Survivor era. It's by Zondervan. Let me just see if I can get the date for you. Oh no, I'm saying 1990s. This is 2003 is the Street Bible. But it looks like it's born out of that. If you look at the way the texts are written, the way that the chapters and verses go, you almost get the sense that you're reading a young person's Bible from that time, you know, a young teen's book from that time. It has that kind of feel to it. So it's important to know that some of these are aimed at our younger readers. They're aimed at people who maybe are graduating from children's Bibles, and so need a bridge to a full out translation, maybe have been reading translation. And it's interesting, this one's quite funny because the title of this is Joel Pest Control, which is quite amusing. I found this one an interesting one. It really is written in a very street language. So this is from the book of Joel. After this, I'll dose you up on my spirit. Your kids will hear from me again. Direct. Your OAPs will get a vivid dream straight from heaven. Your young guys will get potent images from my communications department with subtitles. There won't be a no-go zone for my spirit. I'll pour my spirit out on the wider spectrum of people. So already you can hear in the language that this is aimed at, you know, I know some of our more senior readers will feel very offended by this, but it's aimed to be understood, right? It's aimed that the young person can understand what's happening. Sometimes we put so much on our modern language, you know, oh, these young kids, they don't, but they do read, they do understand, but maybe their language and our language is evolving and changing, and that's what language does. If I think about the things I said when I was a teenager compared to what my young people are saying now as teenagers. I think we're talking two different languages, but it's the English language and it's evolved. I see the roots of what they're saying in the roots of what I said, and I think my parents, if they were honest, could see the roots of what I said in the roots of in what they were saying. It has roots, it's just that it's changed. And so if you are a part of the generation that grew up saying everything was bad, that kind of Michael Jackson era, oh, it's bad, man, that's so bad, and you meant that it was good, and you were a Christian, then you will probably, like me, have undergone the treatment of being told, you see, in the last days, people will say things are bad when they're good and good when they're bad, and you would have heard a really abused version of the biblical narrative. That's not what the Bible is saying. And actually manipulating young people's language to make it say that is actually not very nice. And is putting a distance between us and them that is unnecessary. But there's that. So this is another, this was aimed at a young person again, our younger readers. We won't say that. This one, now this is a Dutch one, but we have English versions of this. This is, the translation would be the Bible in 1001 blocks. And it's the New Testament. Some people would say, oh, but it's not really meant as a paraphrase, Tabitha. Tell that to the neurodiverse child who will only read the Bible if it's in Lego. This is their Bible, you know, and how dare you say it's not a real Bible when they've found out the story of Jesus, and are coming to God through something like this, because this is what they understand. And I think that's an important point about paraphrases, is sometimes we bring all of our baggage to what someone else should read, but we don't see the person. You know, if you have a neurodiverse person in your congregation who really only reads comics, then this might be ideal. There's this, and there are a few others that I have that are done in comic style, which would be ideal for them as readers. And you can continue to, and I hope that people continue to make these sorts of books, and continue to make these sorts of Bibles and these paraphrases, because these are so powerful in helping people who reading different ways to the way that we do, and are maybe obsessed with superheroes and comic books, and that's their reading. Not everybody reads at a high academic level to read 66 books of the Bible in that way. So I think it's really for us to be mindful, and this speaks to our young people in a different way. And it speaks to people. And, you know, I think sometimes when we say neurodiverse, we think only of children, but we forget that adults continue to be neurodiverse. We have lots of those too. So let's see if we round this up. So I'm trying to see if we round it up, and then I press the button too soon. To round this up, I think what I'm saying is that when you get a paraphrase, when you have a book that's given to you of the Bible, and it's the Street Bible, it's the Book of Books, it's the Bible in blocks, it's the Bible in manga, it's the Canvas, the Message Bible, look at the purpose of the book in front of you. Why did that person write that book? What were they aiming for? And that will help you to understand how you should treat it and how you should respect it. This is somebody's work. They've poured their heart into it for a reason. They didn't write it for no reason. They wrote it for a very good reason. And I think it's important to have that. So when we have these sorts of Bibles, which have been given for very specific purposes, young readers, Lego readers, people who've never read a Bible before in their life, people who like the story to have a lot of fire in it and to really get the power of the story to come out, because they're not used to the language of the Bible and the power maybe doesn't hit them in the way. So, you know, that was the Living Bible's purpose, was to get the power of the story out. This, and not to get lost in the language. So all of these different purposes help us. And then when we're actually studying our Bible, you can have this meta-narrative. You can have this big storybook in your head because you've read this, and then you can go and sit with a study book and get into the finer details while never losing sight of this big story of who the Bible is. And so for me personally, that's why I like paraphrases. Like I said, I've got a few, some of which I haven't read for years, and some of which I can't wait to pass on to my children when they get old enough. some of which are really useful for working with the neurodiverse communities of adults and children. And I think it's really important that we take off the judgmental edge and we put on, with love, the idea that people who are writing these things do have a purpose, and it's for us to discern whether that purpose aligns with our purpose. And not every paraphrase is going to align with your purpose. Not every book is going to be your kind of person, and you can let those go without saying anything derogatory about the person, unless there is, you know, clear-cut evil intent. And I think that we need to be a bit more discerning. Yes, mistakes can be made, of course, absolutely. But what is the intention of the book, and why are we reading it? And that stands the same when we're reading a translation to when we're reading a paraphrase. What is the intent? I've spoken about this in our videos about translations. What is the intention of the translation? When you get the intention of the translation, you will understand then why they make the translation choices that they do, why they pick words that they do. And we've spoken about the importance of understanding modern culture, to understand that when we say slavery, the Bible has a different working definition of slavery than a modern person has, because we may think of chattel slavery in the slave trade, the slave triangle from the US, the African nations to Europe. We may think of that, whereas the biblical narrative may not be thinking of that and defining it that way. So it's important that when we use words that are loaded, that have history, that we think about that. The only way to know what the translators and the paraphrasers' intention is to actually read the introductory material and not just act like the translation is a gift from God. Like, you have to think about the intention, and furthermore you have to then think about the cultural and other aspects of language use around that. Some of these, you know, the Street Bible is probably going to be a legacy thing that just sits on my shelf for a while, and one day will end up in the recycling, because this is written in, like I said, it was very dated language for a young person's Bible. This would need to be updated, whereas something like the Book of Books maybe has a little bit more longevity for young people, and the way and the style of which is written can have more legs. So it depends very much on the intention of the author and who they're trying to be understood. Some things last for a time and some things last forever. And so it really does depend on what your purpose is. And so I hope that this has helped to break down some of those myths and barriers surrounding paraphrases. If there's anything you want to add, if there's something that you want to put in there, please do. Please do. Pop it in the comments, and we'll see if we can get to a video on those particular issues. If there is, you know, a paraphrase you want me to look at in more depth and really dig into, then let me know. And if there's a translation I haven't covered yet, it's probably coming, but I can always move it up the system if you want to see one on that. All right then, you guys have a really great day. Bye bye.